wanted to start from like the most simple things. Humans are made of cells. Cells contain DNA in the nucleus. Nucleus is a part inside the cell. DNA is a big long substance with 4 different what we call nucleotides, but basically it's a code with 4 different things in it, variations. And it basically just contains blueprints. And the blueprints tell you and they give you instructions for how to make proteins. Proteins are the things that do everything in your cell. So they can catalyze reactions. They form the structure. They do transport. They signal. They're hormones. They do energy transfer. Basically everything that your body needs to do, it's done by proteins. And how to make proteins is written in the code of the DNA. So you have this DNA sitting in your nucleus, which has a code that tells you when. It doesn't just tell you how the proteins are made, but it tells you there's different sequences that tell you when proteins are supposed to be made and how much. And that is also determined by other factors in there. So you might have a protein that you don't need unless you're like super stressed out. And what it does is it raises your blood pressure so that you can go run away from the bear. So that thing is only going to happen when you really need it. So things are changed, like your body adapts to what's going on in the.
Does this act kind of like an if statement?
A little bit, yeah. A better example would be like inflammation. So you get a cut, you get bacteria in your cut, and your body recognizes that there's foreign material now. And this starts off a huge, incredibly complicated chain reaction that you have a lot of things going on. And one of them is that you'll get these things called transcription factors. And what they do is they bind to DNA and just tell, like in very specific spots, because DNA is a code and parts of the code are like waiting for one specific protein to bind to it. So they'll bind to the DNA and then basically say, make this protein. And what that protein does is it can like increase blood flow to the area. It will like bring in the like cells that eat other cells. It will activate your like antibody response. So like that's kind of what I mean by transcription. And that's something that's really important for development, because in development you'll get you'll start with like what we call stem cells. So we've probably all heard of stem cells. They're cells that have the potential to be any cell in your body, but just haven't developed into that yet. So you have stem cells in your body all the time, like you have stem cells in your bone marrow that form all of the cells in your blood, including your immune cells and like your red blood cells and all those guys. So you start as an embryo with just being like the fertilized egg is basically just a stem cell, and it will divide several times, and then it will start to like form more complex structures, but this is all guided by concentrations of transcription factors. What we call them, like we even call them like master regulators, is the really big ones that say like make an arm or like make this organ here.
So transcription, you're using this word transcription.
Yeah, it's a very specific biological word. So I'll just so that I'm making it make sense. Your DNA can't leave the nucleus; it's stuck in there. But we need to make proteins out of it. Like we need to use it to make proteins. So how does your body do this? So basically, what it does is it copies that. Like your DNA is a very stable molecule, but what it does is it copies it into what we call mRNA, messenger RNA. So it's RNA, which is like DNA, but it has like the sugar is different. The sugar has like one more OH group on it. Hence DNA being deoxyribonucleic acid. RNA is just ribonucleic acid. It doesn't have that deoxy, which is like a lack of oxygen. So that lack of oxygen makes it more stable. So tell me if I'm getting too complex. So your RNA isn't as stable, but what it can do is it can leave the nucleus. So it gets some editing being done. It gets like big chunks of it spliced out, and the chunks that it's spliced out is just like regulatory sequences or other things that we're not sure what they do. And then it gets brought out of the cell, and then you have a separate system called translation, which makes that into a protein, and that's through like ribosomes. That's a whole other process but just as long as you recognize that the RNA, your DNA gets transcribed into RNA, and then your RNA can leave the nucleus and then be turned into a protein. well, not turned into a protein, but then read, and then it's a code for protein. And that code also includes like where it needs to go.